Been a while since we could talk about a court case. I know it's not what many of you guys are here for, but the Google Antitrust case has been super interesting to watch as it's went down. I'm really invested in these types of things. They're just kind of fun for me, but also spell out really big impact on the industry. And this one's looking really big. Matt Prince, the CEO of Cloudflare, said, "Seems like good news for Google, bad news for Apple, and the end for Mozilla." Levels.io said that Google funds Mozilla with $550 million a year to set Google as the default browser. That has to stop today, so Mozilla lost 85% of its revenue, and that means Firefox is dead. But on the other hand, we have people like Tim Sweeney saying that Google lost the search case a while back, but they just resoundingly won in the remedies phase. It's like a defendant robbed a series of banks, and the court verdict found them guilty, then sentenced them to probation, under which they may continue to rob banks, but they must share data on how they rob banks with competing bank robbers. Oh, Tim. Love this guy. As always, reality is somewhere between all of this. I've spent far too much time combing through these 230 pages of legal docs, as well as reading official statements from the Department of Justice and reading a bunch of takes from anti-competitive and antitrust lawyers to try my best to understand and break down the utter chaos that is occurring here. And believe me, this one's chaotic. Google absolutely behaved in monopolistic ways. There are remediations here that are meaningful, but are these significant remedies against Google's monopolization of online search, or are they requiring them to teach others how to rob banks the way they do? Reality is somewhere between all of this. I've done my best to find said reality for you guys, as well as share all of the sources that I've covered, but I'm not getting paid any remedies here, and someone's got to cover our bills, especially because Google might break my other arm after this video. So quick break for today's sponsor, and then we'll dive right in. I need to be honest with y'all. I made a mistake. I thought I'd be able to roll my own auth for T3 chat, and while I did, it's caused us endless problems. If you wonder why we still only support Google, blame me. It's my fault for thinking I could just deploy this myself and manage it all well. It worked well enough, but the more we iterate, the more problems we're running into. And now that we have big companies trying to use our product, I immensely regret not using today's sponsor, WorkOS. We're moving to them actively right now because it's going to solve so many of the problems I've caused for ourselves by thinking I could just vibe code my way through some auth. I would be more insecure about this if it wasn't for the fact that all these other companies have went through the exact same thing. The majority of them didn't start on WorkOS, they moved there, and they are all very happy that they did. I'm pumped that this quote from Guillermo, the CEO and founder of Vercel, is on the site because I've chatted with him about this before. He genuinely regrets the fact that they tried rolling their own auth initially because it made it impossible for them to sell to a lot of the companies they were trying to early on. As he says, "I think we could have done even more business if we had partnered with WorkOS earlier. It's been incredibly well received. Don't make the same mistake that both Guillermo and I made. Start with them today. By the way, the first million users are free. What do you have to lose? Check them out now at soydev.link/WorkOS. Once again, according to the Office of Public Affairs in the U.S. Department of Justice, these are significant remedies against Google. In U.S. versus Google, the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia prohibited Google from entering or maintaining exclusive contracts relating to the distribution of Google Search, Chrome, Google Assistant, and the Gemini app, ordered Google to make certain search indexes and user interaction data available to rivals and potential rivals, and also ordered Google to offer search and search text ad syndication services to enable rivals and potential rivals to compete. This sounds like a lot. In particular, the lack of exclusive contracts for distributing Google Search is kind of a death knell. In case you didn't already know this, Google spends literally billions a year just paying Apple and Mozilla to make Google Search the default on iOS and Firefox, respectively. Most of Firefox's development is funded by Google, paying them to make sure the default search stays Google. I don't think they're doing that because they get $550 million of value out of it every year from people using Google Search on Firefox. Let's be real, the average Firefox user is both not worth a whole lot of money and isn't going to stick with Google anyways. They're going to go use a different search engine. The reason they do that is because it allows for Firefox to keep being developed and for the ecosystem to not become a giant Chrome monopoly, which, believe it or not, they don't actually want. They want the web to keep getting better so that they can keep building products on the web and not having to build a Windows app and a Mac app for every single thing they do. The Apple thing, however, that's absolutely a cash grab. They're spending $1 billion plus a year on Apple putting iOS search as Google for default because the average iOS users are going to use whatever search it does. They want to maintain that. They're going to spend a lot of money to maintain that. It's probably even more at this point. Those numbers aren't public, but the $1 billion rumor has been going around for a while. I see why they would do that. That is monopolistic behavior, though. If you're trying to build a competitor to Google search and Google's paying all of the different providers of hardware and software to make Google the default, and you don't have $1 billion to outbid them, you're just screwed. You can't compete with that. That is, by nature, anti-competitive. Other examples of this type of behavior would be the way Gemini works in Chrome. They gave Gemini exclusive access to this new special button in Chrome, those who use their AI on their browser. If other AI providers don't have the same level of integration capability as Google does there, and Google shipping it by default, they are using their monopoly in browsers to force a win in other spaces. That is when monopolies get bad, when you use vertical leverage against different areas in different markets. Because you won one market, you can force wins in others. Another fun example of this would be the way that games subscriptions work on iOS. On iPhone, you can subscribe to Apple's Arcade for some amount of money a month and have access to all the games that Apple went and bought the rights to so that you can download them as part of your subscription. You can't use competing game subscription platforms because Apple doesn't allow you to do licensing like that on the App Store. They wouldn't even let you stream games until recently because they got in legal trouble for that. They could just shut out industry categories they didn't like because they had such a large portion of the smartphone market, and in particular, exclusive access to app distribution on iPhone. Since Apple chooses what apps can go out, they can leverage that and use it to force a win in places that they might not even be competitive in. That is why we have antitrust laws, because we want for competition to continue to make better products. And if you can't use a competitor's product because the other product you're using prevents it, that sucks. And that's why this case happened, because Google's used their monopoly on Chrome and on search to extend their monopolies on Chrome and search, as well as build up potential monopolies in other spaces. Now, if they're spending the money they make on search to make search better, to make search more successful and get more people using search, that's not a violation of like vertical bounds. They're not spending money from one thing or using resources from one thing to force a win in another thing. Like Google really hasn't done something similar to Amazon, for example, when they banned distribution of Chromecasts and other Google streaming boxes on Amazon because they wanted to sell Fire Sticks instead. That would be a vertical boundary violation. Google just isn't doing that as much. They're surprisingly open for how gigantic and evil they are. That said, there were things found, and we should talk about what they're going to do, especially because this part sounds really, really damning. If Google isn't allowed to do exclusive contracts relating to distribution of Google Search, Chrome, Assistant, and Gemini, that theoretically means they can't pay Apple for Google Search anymore. Or worse, they can't pay Firefox for Google Search anymore, which means Firefox all of a sudden can't survive. Like they don't have enough money to build Firefox if they don't get the Google money. The browser I'm using right now, Zen, could very well have its core rot and die if Google's not allowed to pay Mozilla anymore for Google Search. The court's ruling today recognizes the need for remedies that will pry open the market for general search services, which has been frozen in place for over a decade. The ruling also recognizes the need to prevent Google from using the same anti-competitive tactics for its Gen AI products as it used to monopolize search. The remedies will reach Gen AI technologies and companies. So what are they doing? Let's read through the remedies. Google will be barred from entering or maintaining any exclusive contract relating to the distribution of Search, Chrome, Assistant, and Gemini. They should not enter or maintain any agreement that conditions the licensing of the Play Store or any other Google application on the distribution, preloading, and placement of Google Search, Chrome, Search Assistant, or Gemini anywhere on a device. This is a big piece. If you're on Android, you need the Play Store. The Play Store is how you get apps on Android. There have been attempts to do other app stores, and most of those attempts have failed hilariously badly. There was another case earlier this year that I covered that was Epic versus Google, and Epic slaughtered Google, forcing them to make the whole Play Store catalog available to other app stores, forcing them to no longer be able to pay other hardware companies like, I don't know, Samsungs and companies like that from using Google Play Store exclusively on their devices, and generally opening up the market for new app stores on Android. I wish that the Apple case went as well as the Google one did. Yeah. The Play Store ruling was insane. In particular, the giving access of the whole catalog to external providers is insane. This piece here, though, seems very specifically tied to Play Store. It seems like a thing Google would do is they would not let you have Play Store and get Play Store certification on your Android phone as a manufacturer if you didn't also make Google Search the search engine. So they were using their monopoly on the App Store for Android to force Google to be the search engine on Android. That is, again, vertical violations. They are using their win in this one space to force wins in others. And since Android is the dominant third-party operating system for manufacturing smartphones, they're able to make Play Store monopolistic too by making it the only place you can get most of the apps and using the success of Android to lock this App Store in. Crazy. They're also not allowed to do a contract that requires all of Google's things be added. For example, if you have Google search on your Samsung phone and Google makes money off of ads from that search placement, they might have a contract where they'll give you 20% of that ad revenue from having Google search as the default, but they'll only give you that percentage if you also include all of Google's other things. That is the bundling, stapling on thing that this court case and this remediation series seems to be focused on nailing in. Google can't just force you to include all of their stuff because you want to get rev share on Google search or you want to get rev share on the Play Store. Each one of those applications has to have its own rev share model. You can't be forced to get all of Google's rev share stuff just because you want one app's rev share. This is a big change in how Google has to negotiate these deals with handset manufacturers building Android phones. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if Google starts divesting in Android heavily because they've taken 2 big hits on Android. Like, this is much bigger hit for Android than it is for Google. And honestly, Google makes more money on the average iPhone user than Android user anyways. Android's role was to bring smartphones to a larger portion of the market and make internet-based services more accessible to the rest of the world. And they've succeeded in that. Everyone has a smartphone now in every market they can reasonably make money on. They don't need Android to keep winning for Google to keep winning on mobile. And they know that. The last notable piece on this remediation is they can't prohibit other partners from simultaneously distributing other search engines, browsers, and AI products. So if Samsung does a deal with Google where they're going to include Gemini and Google search and get rev share, and then OpenAI comes by and says, hey, we want to make a similar deal, Google's deal can't lock out other competitors. Here is where the big things occur, though. This is the Google lost, but how big did they lose? It honestly seems like Android is the big loser because Google isn't going to be required to divest Chrome or a lot of the other deals that they have. Google will not be required to divest Chrome, nor will the court include a contingent divestiture of Android in the final judgment. Plaintiffs overreached in seeking forced divestiture of these key assets, which Google did not use to effect any illegal restraints. There we go. The court has now said loud and clear, Google has not used Chrome or Android directly to do illegal restraints. They have used them alongside other things indirectly to do it, but those other things and the agreements with those other things are the problem. I have been saying this from day one. Google's way of running Chrome is really not that monopolistic when you consider all of the details for it, especially when you consider the fact that of the 20 browsers on my computer, 18 of them are based on Chrome. Google has not operated Chrome in a particularly monopolistic way. It seems like the US courts are getting a lot better at the tech stuff finally. Next point. Google won't be barred from making payments or offering other consideration to distribution partners for preloading or placement of Google Search, Chrome, or GenAI products. Cutting off payments from Google almost certainly will impose substantial, and in some cases crippling, downstream harms to distribution partners, related markets, and consumers, which counsels against a broad payment ban. This is the big deal. This is the Google won't be banned from paying Apple and Firefox, and I love the call out here that this would almost certainly impose substantial, or in some cases crippling, downstream harms to distribution partners, related markets, and consumers. Absolutely. If Google was to be banned from paying Firefox, Firefox dies. If Google was to be banned from paying Apple, Apple has to go to a worse search provider to get some type of contract out of them that's worse. Now, iPhones have to cost more money because they're not being subsidized by Google. Lots of things downstream get worse if Google can't do deals like this. The details of the deals might be bad, but the overall nature of them does allow for better experiences for users and, more importantly, for a more competitive market. Here's where things start getting fun again, though, with the restrictions on search. In particular, they now have to make qualified competitors have access to their search indexing and user interaction data. So all the work they've put into indexing the web now has to be exposed to competitors. So companies like Microsoft with Bing, Perplexity, potentially even stuff like DuckDuckGo, obviously OpenAI and Anthropic, all of these companies that have to build their own search now can have access to some of the data that Google has collected and refused to share. Very fun. They do call out that ad data is not included here. But by sharing the search indexing and user interaction data, all the weird shit Google did to be the exclusive company able to collect this won't benefit them exclusively anymore. Yeah. The court has narrowed the data sets that Google is required to share to tailor to remedy their anti-competitive conduct. They're also going to be forced to allow qualified competitors to do search and text ad syndication services that are compatible with Google's platform to enable them to deliver high-quality search results and ads in order to compete with Google while they develop their own search technology and capacity. These are the really interesting pieces. Again, it's similar to the ruling in the Android App Store case, where the Play Store has to expose its catalog to competitors in order for those competitors to be able to catch up within a couple years. So they're forcing Google to allow for access to some of their technology and some of their platform to competitors so that they can start ramping up and building their own solutions to make the market more competitive. It's also worth noting that when there are remediations like this in these modern tech cases, it's relatively common for there to be a memorandum, like an amount of time it can go for. And if in that amount of time, the market doesn't see meaningful competitors come out, then the remediation will end and nothing changes. There's a chance that what Google has here is a natural monopoly where they just have the better product, the competition can't make anything better, and they will continue to have it because Google won. They are the industry standard, they're the default. It is also possible that they're only winning because of their anti-competitive bullshit. If the anti-competitive bullshit is toned down for 5 years and all of the things that Google has that are advantages are given to their competition, and the competition still can't make any real headway in 5 years, that suggests that these remediations aren't necessary and they will probably be lifted. I'm guessing that is probably detailed much further down in this document somewhere. It's also worth noting that building an ad network is really, really hard. The only actually successful ad platforms in the world are Google and Meta. Facebook's ad network is incredibly powerful, and Google's is probably just as powerful. Meta's better at micro-targeting for specific demographics and areas and whatnot. Google has much better general targeting and abilities to get ads everywhere in the world, better video ads, better all sorts of other things. Amazon's ad platform is a fucking joke. I worked at Amazon and Twitch when we were trying to integrate it. Absolute shit show. Yeah, so potential for competition in the ad space is very interesting. Apparently, Elon was just streaming earlier talking about ads. I'm excited to check that out later. If you don't know, Elon and I have a long-standing beef about ads.
Twitter can accurately recommend tweets to you that you don't explicitly follow. It can by the same token also show ads that are relevant to you.
So the way that a lot of platforms do ad sales and a lot of like purchasers expect ads isn't necessarily I'm going to give you these ads and I trust you to serve them to the right people. It's usually almost the opposite, where it's I want to target this group of people in this region who went to a Jiffy Lube in the last 72 days. That level of micro-targeting is something a lot of ad buyers now expect. And like, it's a huge part of how CPMs can get so high on platforms like YouTube. But sometimes these advertisers will serve entirely different versions of the same ad to different demographics. Can you turn
this guy off, please? He's just talking nonsense. Thanks. I've actually talked to the advertisers.
Yeah. Elon did not know how ads worked. I accidentally talked over him because I had such a shit connection. There were so many bugs on Twitter at the time because this was fresh post acquisition. You'll notice that it says live there. I wasn't live. I had a bot that would change my pro pic, and then I couldn't change it back because of the new verification program. I didn't know he was talking because it went blank on my end, so I just started speaking and then heard that he was already talking because the latency was so bad. It was a rough time. Regardless, George defended me because I was right, and slowly Elon started to agree, in particular on the video ad side. But yeah, this clip's been played at a bunch of random marketing and advertising conferences as a joke showing how little Elon understands ads. But on the other hand, I can empathize with the shit position he's in because they don't have the data that they need to target people more specifically. If Coke wants to make 3 different versions of the same ad for 3 different demographics they're targeting, they can't even select them on Twitter. And Elon seems to think that the way ads work is you make this one really good ad for this product and the algorithm will magically find the customers and show it to them. It does not work that way at all. So yeah, advertising is hard, and if you don't have the crazy amounts of data about your users that both Google and Facebook have, which is now harder than ever to get because most platforms, in particular iOS, have locked down the ability for these platforms to scrape data about you. It's way harder for Facebook to learn about you if you weren't a big Facebook user 10 years ago now because their access to this data is restricted. Google and Meta have these giant corpuses of data that allow them to do micro-targeting. No one else has it. And if Google is now going to be forced to give some of that distribution up to competitors, there's, for the first time ever possibly, a real way to compete with Google Ads. I'm curious to see what this syndication ends up looking like, but Only time will tell. No amount of reading this document will give us an actual picture of what this will look like, especially after all the back and forth and fighting Google's going to do on every detail. Next point is that Google won't have to present users with choice screens. You know, the fancy EU, when you set up an iPhone, you have to pick between 20 browsers. They don't have to do any of that shit, thankfully. I love this call out here. In any event, choice screens have not been shown to enhance competition amongst search engines. Next point is that Google will not be required to share granular query-level data with advertisers to provide them with more access to such data, nor will it have to restore an exact match keyword bidding option. The plaintiff didn't establish that these remedies would promote competition. This is more details on search where certain advertisers wanted more data and wanted more ability to target exact things. If you want to understand the exact match keyword bidding, here's your screenshot. Claude would target GPT-5 searches. So when people look for GPT-5, you would get the sponsored ad for Claude. I couldn't replicate that one, but I just searched Smart AI Assistant and got a bunch of sponsored posts for Microsoft's AI chat powered by 4.0, as well as Chatbot Chat App, free online AI chat. Maybe we need to be doing ads. If this can work with no favicon or anything, we need to experiment more. Keyword targeting is useful to a lot of these businesses when they're trying to win specific spaces or break into specific markets. And Anthropic's obviously one of the companies that likes to do that. Google's been more restrictive about exact matches, more doing trends and topic matching. Like, do you want to be recommended to AI people? Do you want to be recommended to developers? Do you want to be recommended to people who are into music? Instead of this search will result in this thing coming up. They have to disclose changes to ad auctions. That's good because Google's known for changing things about their ad platform all the time and not sharing any of it. One of the proposed remediations was that Google would have to do a nationwide public education campaign on how Google Ads and like the internet works that they'd have to pay for themselves. It's stupid and it was ruled against. Google won't have to modify its policies to offer website publishers more choice in how Google uses their content. It has no relationship to Google's unlawful acts and improper demand. Google will not be subject to an investment reporting requirement. It too bears no relationship to Google's anti-competitive conduct. And Google will not be subject to anti-retaliation, anti-circumvention, or self-preferencing provisions. The first two restrictions are too vague and do not comport with the requirements of the Federal Rule of Civil Procedure. There is no legal or factual basis for the last. Yeah, this is the Google gets out of jail free to an extent here. Oh, and here is the terms for how long this will all be. It's a judgment for 6 years. It will become effective 60 days after entry. Enough of my thoughts. Let's hear what an actual lawyer who's an antitrust guy has to say. John's reporting on this has been awesome so far. The court starts out correctly saying that the remediation must pry open the market, but then it says denying the fruits of the violation is merely a valid objective. Interesting calling that out, saying require, but then the next part is valid objective. Courts must approach a task of crafting remedies with a healthy dose of humility. I have a slightly different interpretation of what is happening here than John does. I think this type of wording is mostly the judge trying to crack down on the plaintiff, asking for such absurd remediations to be made. Things like that national campaign and education thing is insane. I understand why the judge would want to say we need to be reasonable and act with humility. Just because Google fucked up doesn't mean we can turn them into our personal piggy bank type thing. Also not great is the court refers back to the previous paragraphs as summarizing its power, but those are actually requirements. They limit the court's discretion to issue weak remedies. They don't empower the same. Yeah. Also of note is I think the word and here with Google Search, Chrome, Google Assistant, and Gemini app means that they can't do exclusive contracts requiring all of these be distributed together. And I bet Google will fight and argue that that is what was meant here. The prohibitions on tying and payment for the default status are fine. It's kind of the bare minimum. There is one concern. It sounds like Google can make revenue share payments to smartphone OEMs and rival browsers as long as the contract duration is less than a year. I also think they can do it as long as the contracts aren't for multiple things at once. So why is this troubling? Google already illegally maintained its overwhelmingly dominant market position for over a decade and used the fruits of their illegal conduct, billions of search queries, to give itself a competitive advantage. As long as it can make rev share payments now, Google can incentivize distribution to preference Google. It doesn't have to outright pay for default status as long as its revenue share payments are incentivizing that. Again, the argument's the search data because Google has had billions of searches a year because of their anti-competitive practice. That's data that competitors don't have, so they can't make as good of a search engine. That's why they're being forced to expose it. John thinks that the consistent ability for Google to pay for their stuff with revenue sharing is going to maintain the ongoing monopoly. Again, my argument is that Google has given themselves an advantage. The ruling shouldn't be to crush Google so much as balance that advantage out so others are at the same level on the playing field in terms of like product capability, not in terms of like ability to pay to get into the right places, but in terms of viability of their competition and their competing products, as well as access to those things. This is a structural remedy versus divestiture remedy. The structural means that they're trying to restructure the market to make it more competitive again. A divestiture is you can't be trusted with this asset, we're taking it from you. Epic versus Apple cited as the requirement screens and the product design requirements in remedies. While I do agree that choice screens have not been shown to enhance competition for search engines, my counter would be that the opposite, which is when Google or Apple intentionally make really big, scary screens to divert people away from specific solutions, that's when it gets really bad. Like when Apple was forced to allow other payment methods through external links. They put up this big, scary, ugly warning saying, by the way, we can't protect you if you go pay here, to scare users away from going the other routes. And Apple got crushed in a follow-up hearing because of that. Court never found Google engaging in consumer protection violations as to its ad auctions, but a whiff of that premediated proceedings. Remedies about preventing excessive price making, that the market would work better rather than slowly increasing competition. And then the Google will not be subject to anti-retaliation and anti-circumvention provisions. Google also was bad about evidence preservation and didn't get punished for that at all, which is surprising. Google's honestly been pretty bad in these court cases. I still can't believe how much harder Google's being crushed in these cases than Apple. It just seems like their lawyers aren't as good, but they both screwed up their cases quite a bit. Hopefully this doesn't turn out like Epic versus Apple, but I wouldn't bet on it. And saying that these restrictions don't comport with FRCP 65D is sort of nonsensical. Only an injunction can fail to comport with 65D, and there isn't an injunction being issued. That is an interesting detail, that like this federal rule is one of behaving according to an injunction. If there is no injunction, nothing's going to follow that rule because that rule is not relevant unless there's an injunction. So this is saying there isn't an injunction because this rule doesn't require it. But the rule is given an injunction is violated, then this rule kicks in. So that's just a silly statement. That's a good call out, actually. They cited a Microsoft case as well as United States versus United Shoe Corp from the 1960s, which clearly states that there was a fourth remedial objective to terminate the illegal monopoly, which on remand, the district court deemed this as an improper use in that case in the New York versus Microsoft later on. The court has not decided to follow this issue because there are independent reasons that remedies designed to eliminate the defendant's monopoly, like structural remedies, are inappropriate in this case. According to John, this is a binding precedent says I must do this, but I'm not going to do it. This is lawless antitrust, as he refers to it. Scary stuff. Apparently, they miscited a Ford case. The ordinary starting point is an injunction terminating the anti-competitive conduct, citing this Ford case. And in the Ford case, it says divestiture is a start. Again, an injunction on anti-competitive practice that is balancing the structure is different from divestiture. And it's interesting that the court case they cited as proof they don't need to do divestiture literally says divestiture is a start. Very interesting call out. This thread has a lot of good points, and it's a pretty good balance and counter to a lot of what I have said here. I highly recommend giving it a read. It will be linked in the description if you want to go more in depth with all of this. As always, make sure you check multiple sources because it's very easy to fall for misinformation with this one. Like here, Poor Levels convinced that this court order means that Google can't keep paying Mozilla when they absolutely can keep paying Mozilla. And even Matt Prince, the CEO of Cloudflare, seems to have entirely misunderstood this one. What a war this one has been. I love talking about these things. I know it's not for everybody, but if you made it this far, it might just be for you. Let me know what you thought. And until next time, peace nerds.